Okay, today's daf is Kaf Aleph in Sheqalim. We're going to start on Kaf Amud Bet, bottom of the page, 3 lines from the bottom. It says Rabbi Ba Bar Mamal. What does he have to say? Ba'eh, he asked the following question. Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is in contradiction with himself. How so? Because Taman Amar Mishal Yorashin. Because over there in the Mishnah he says Mishal Yorashin. That when there's no Kohen Gadol, in other words, a Kohen Gadol dies, and now we have to continue bringing his Asiri Taifa, his daily flour offering that he's obligated to bring. So where does it come from? Originally he said it was Mishel Yorashin. It has to come from the inheritors of the Kohen Gadol's estate, in other words, from his children. And yet, and here, in what we just read above, he said that it should come Mishel Tzibur, that it should come from the community. So which one is it? Does he say that it should come from the Yorashim? Does he say it should come from the heirs of the estate, or does he say from the tzibur? So Amar Rabbi Chaya Bar Ba, we turn to Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph at the top. V'lo ya'utu makshe. Isn't he asking a good question? In other words, he says that's an excellent question. He chimes in to approve the question, but he doesn't give an answer. Ata Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha came, and Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, and he reported that Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan the following: Devar Torah hu shetei min hatzibur. That really, whenever there's no Kohen Gadol, Devar Torah, according to the Torah, it should come from the tzibur. Really, it should come from the community. Hayiti omer yigvula. And really, what we should do is collect it from the community. In other words, there should be a separate collection. Because it doesn't come from the machatzita shekel. It's not usually coming from the machatzita shekel. It's not usually coming from the general fund. It's usually coming from the Kohen Gadol. Now that the Kohen Gadol died, really we should make a new collection to the tzibur. The community should pay for it. However, so they made a takana, they made a rule that it should come from the Trumat HaLishka, that it should come from the monies of the Machatzita Shekel, because they didn't want to go about collecting a new a whole new collection just for the offering of the Kohen Gadol. So since they didn't want to go through that, they were able to take the money from the general fund. Now, there is in the parentheses here where it says Kevan Haiti Omer Yigvula Mina Yorashin. So they see in the parentheses, if you read it with the parentheses, so what it comes out is that originally they thought that they should really transfer the obligation to the heirs of the Kohen Gadol, because they didn't want to collect it from the community, but then they eventually saw that was very difficult to get the family members of the Kohen Gadol to pay up like that, so therefore they went back to the original and started taking it from the Trumat HaLishka. So in other words, there was really an evolution. It seems like the simplest way to read the Gemara is that there was an evolution, and that's why Rabbi Shimon in one place mentions that it comes from the heirs of the Kohen Gadol, and in one place he says it comes from the communal fund, because originally it really was supposed to come from the communal fund. That was complicated, so they started going to the heirs of the Kohen Gadol and asking them to contribute it, since they didn't want to make a new fundraising project just for that. And then when they realized that was too complicated, they just made a condition that whenever they received funds into the general fund, they had a condition that they could be used for the offering of the Kohen Gadol if need be. So therefore there were 3 stages in the application of the halakha. There was the original biblical law that it should come from the community in a separate fundraising. Then there was the alternative that it should come from the family of the Kohen Gadol. But then when that didn't seem to work so well, they started taking it from the community again, but not in a separate project. They had a condition placed on the money they collected that it could be used for that purpose as well. Yes?
Where are the parentheses from?
I'm not really sure exactly in Yerushalmi where they're from. In the Bavli, it just means that the people who eventually printed it knew that the better manuscripts were... The parentheses usually don't read, because that meant it was from a worse manuscript. And what's in the block brackets you do read, because that was from the better manuscript. That's the implication. But here, I'm not sure how it works here. In Yerushalmi, it's a little bit different. Rabbi Yosah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosah, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, asked the following question: Ma'u shlema. So it said in the Mishnah that when the Kohen Gadol dies, we offer, remember, he offers a tenth of an ephah every day. He splits it in half. Chotze ota, right? So he splits it. He brings half in the morning, half in the afternoon. It said in the Mishnah when there's no Kohen Gadol, you bring it shlema. Not split, shlema. What does shlema mean? Shlema. No, well, that's the question. Don't jump. We don't know yet. Shlema b'shacharit u'shlema ben arba'im. Do there still have to be 2 offerings? But since you don't have a Kohen Gadol, you have to offer the whole thing each time. So in the morning you bring the Asiri Taifa, and there's no Kohen Gadol to split it in half, so you have to do the whole thing. Is that what it means? And then in the afternoon you have to bring it again, and you're not allowed to split it because you don't have the Kohen Gadol. So again, you have to offer the whole thing. Is that what it means to say? Or Shelema b'Shacharit uvtela ben arba'im. Or does it mean, no, there's still only one asirit haifa, there's still only one quantity offered per day, but that quantity isn't split. We just offer it in the morning and there's nothing in the afternoon. So does it mean to do it twice, the full measure each time instead of a half measure, or does it mean to do it the full measure at once? That's the question. Similarly, kad tehei pshitale, and if you're able to resolve that, techtiv minchat tamid, because it says minchat tamid, okay? Shloshet lugin mahen. What about the shloshet lugin? We know that there are three log of shemen, 3 log of oil that are mixed in with the flour of the tenth of the ephah, but you split it in half. So that means you have 1.5 in one half, 1.5 in the other half. So what happens here? Do we say that, in other words, if you're going to assume that really what needs to be done is that you offer this offering twice. You offer it once in the morning shlema, once in the afternoon shlema. In other words, you double the quantity that's offered when there's no Kohen Gadol. You have to offer first we dealt with the flour. First the flour. So, and if we conclude that because it says minchat tamid, that we can't change the schedule, which means you have to have morning and afternoon, and since you're not allowed to split it, you have to bring the full measure in the morning and the full measure in the afternoon. What about the oil? You have to bring now a full measure of oil in the morning and a full measure in the afternoon? Or can you split it and just do 1.5 in the morning, 1.5 in the afternoon, just like you normally would? So the question is, does the oil follow the same rule as the flour? Right? Shloshet lugin b'shacharit, shloshet lugin ben arbaim. Oh, log umechetza shacharit v'log umechetza ben arbaim. So what do we say? Do we split the oil or not? And Amar Rabbi Chizkiah, oh vadet tzrichale. And you have a similar question. Shnei kometzin mahen. Shnei kometzin b'shacharit, shnei kometzin ben arbaim. Oh, kometz achat b'shacharit, v'kometz achat ben arbaim. Because in addition to bringing the flour that had to be brought, there was also a bringing of the kometz. He also brings some livona. He also brings some frankincense in the morning and in the afternoon. So the question is, does he have to bring 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon? Or does he bring 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon? So if we read the Korban Aidah, he explains a little bit of what's going on here. So he says that the Kohen Gadol has to bring 2 handfuls of livona every day. He brings 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon to accompany his 2 korbanot. Okay? So once you're saying that you need to do the full measure in the morning and the full measure in the afternoon, so is it relative? In other words, is it proportional? So the Kohen Gadol, when he was alive, he brought half of the quantity of flour, half the quantity of oil in the morning, and also only 1 handful of livona. But now that we're going to double it up, we're going to say, no, you need to bring the full quantity of flour, the full quantity of oil in the morning, and the full quantity of flour and the full quantity of oil in the afternoon. So does that mean that you also have to have 2 handfuls of livona in the morning and 2 handfuls of livona in the afternoon now, because you doubled the measure of flour and oil in the morning and afternoon, so you also should double the amount of livona in the morning and the afternoon? That's the question. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Chizkiah says, Klum lamedu shloshet lugin lo mitamid shel ben harbaim. Malalan shloshet lugin afkan shloshet lugin. Where do we learn the idea of the 3 log of oil that have to be put into the 10th of an ephah of the Kohen Gadol's offering? We learn it from the Tamid of ben harbaim. We learn it from the Korban. Okay, we learn it from the laws of the daily korban. Just like it has to be 3 log, it has to be 3 log here. Many people erase this from the Gemara. This particular line doesn't necessarily belong here. In fact, the Gra has a totally different reading here. The Gra has a reading that the question was, should we bring half of a handful in the morning and half of a handful in the afternoon instead of 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon? There's a whole different version of the Gemara here. But basically, at the end of the day, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that we double up on everything. So since we're doubling up on flour, we're doubling up on oil, so it seems like the conclusion also is we're going to double up on livona. Everything is going to remain proportional for the offering.
Not required. In other words, livona being just...
No, it also accompanies the offering.
But it's required?
Yeah, it's required.
It's required.
Yeah.
What does the Kohen Gadol bring in the livana in the morning and the afternoon?
He brings normally what he brings is half a measure of flour, half a measure of oil, and 1 handful of livona.
And what about in the afternoon?
And the same exact thing.
So he doubles it up.
He had 2 per day. So we're doubling up in the morning. In other words, we're doing each half, we're doing the amount he did in a whole.
So we're assuming now that each one required for you was 2.
In other words,
Well, we're asking that question.
in other words, if for a tenth of an ephah of flour per day
Right.
and 3 log of oil per day, you require 2 handfuls of livonah. So if everything's proportional, now that we're doing a full measure of flour and a full measure of oil in the morning, you should have 2 handfuls of livonah with that. And then when you do a full handful of, so if it's all proportional, that's the way it should go. And that seems to be the way the Gemara concludes, although if you look at the Gra on the side, he has a totally different reading of this whole piece here, and that it's really learning it out actually from the Lechem HaPanim, and there's a whole other thing. Okay, so now Rabbi Shimon Bar Nachman, B'Shem Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, Shmuel Bar Nachman rather, said the name of Rabbi Yonatan, Bedin Hu Shimaluba. So now we go back to what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said that one who uses the ashes of the red heifer, okay, for personal use, they made a takana that he doesn't commit me'ilah. It's not considered to be misappropriation. He doesn't violate the law of misappropriation. So the thing is, though, that really it should be. V'hen gazru shelo yimaluba. And they made a gezerah that you're not considered to be misappropriating, but how exactly can they do that, right? That's a little bit strange. Really what the Braita says is that it calls the para aduma chatat. Okay, the animal is called a chatat. If the animal, meaning a chatat, you commit me'ilah when you use it for your own personal use. But the efer, the ashes, no. The ashes is not considered to be me'ilah. So what happened though? Amar Rabbi Abba. So in other words, from the Torah, it's not like we thought. From the Torah, really, the efer of the para aduma is not considered something subject to benefit. It's not something you can really derive benefit from, so it's not considered benefit. However, Amar Rabbi Abba said, Barishonah hayu mishtash. What is this word? Mishtak shekin, right? Mishtak shekin ba. They would abuse it. They would degrade it. They thought, hey, just like these ashes, they purify you. Maybe they have some magical powers. I'm going to put them on my wound. I have a cut. I'm going to put it on my arm. It's going to heal me up really well. They didn't want that. So v'gazru sheyimaluba. So even though there was really no law that you commit me'ilah, there's no law of misappropriation when it comes to these ashes, but they saw that people were abusing that, so they didn't want that. So they made a gzera. But once they saw that the people started behaving again, they rescinded the decree. Okay, so that's how they could rescind the decree. In other words, if biblically you're considered to be committing me'ilah by benefiting from the ashes, how can the rabbis come along and remove that? They can't remove that. But if really biblically there is no such law, and the rabbis instituted it so that people wouldn't go and take these ashes and think that they had some magical powers, so now it makes sense that they rescinded the decree once people stopped behaving that way. Vala kinin. We learned about the kinin. We learned about that if a woman deposits the money to be split in half between an olah and a chatat to fulfill her obligation, let's say for example she had a child and she has to bring bird korbanot. She brings an olah and a chatat. So what happens is when they bring those offerings, sometimes things get mixed up. Right, we found out things get mixed up, or one of the birds that she donated becomes pasul. So it said that we learned in the Mishnah before that let's see what the exact language was over there with the kinin, that if right, that if they find one of these birds to be pasul, then we replace it. The community replaces it. Or the other version was that no, whoever the supplier is responsible to replace it. But either way, the question is, Aisha hazot ba'mehi mitkaperet. So how does she fulfill her obligation? In other words, if the one that she donated is actually gone, how is she going to fulfill her obligation to bring the offering? Rabbi Yitzchak says tonight bedinu. That it was a condition of the Bet Din that they made that anytime something became pasul or anything got lost, they would replace it, and it would be the ownership of it, in other words, would be transferred to the person who needed it. So if I was the person who put the money and the one that was bought with my money was lost, now they replace it, but the condition of the Bet Din is that it's transferred to the person for whom it was needed. Therefore, it will become mine again, and therefore the woman doesn't have to worry that maybe, oh my gosh, mine was pasul and it probably wasn't offered today, and therefore I'm really tme'ah. I didn't fulfill my obligation. No, it doesn't work that way. We know that they're going to supply all of the necessary offerings will be offered that day, and if they had to replace it, they make sure that it belongs to the woman and that she fulfills her obligation as well. So we conclude the parak that dealt with all of this money that was found in random places, right, and all of these items that are found in different places and how we judge them. So now the new Mishnah says, if you find spittle on the ground in Jerusalem, we assume that it's tahor. Now what's the problem? Azav, for example, a person who is azav, who he has this condition of ziva, so his spittle is also considered tameh. And if his saliva gets on you, it will make you tameh. So if you find, well, he has to stay away from the tahor people. Yeah, he has to stay away from them so that they don't become tameh. So people would know.
It's like the Ashkenazi thing that if you are not married, you don't put
a talis.
Yeah,
but
so the people know.
Exception to the rule that usually, when found, it's always tameh.
Right.
But this is an exception.
No, according to Rebbe Meir, he says that if you find saliva, it's all tahor chutz mishel shuk ha'elyon, except for the upper marketplace. We're going to see why. Well, he had to because he had to go. It was a mitzvah on him not to make other things tameh and other people, so he had to. He had no choice. It wasn't an embarrassment. It was just what you had. Rabbi Yosef says b'shar kol yomot shana shebe'emtza tmein shebetzedadin teorinu b'shat regel shebe'emtza teorinu shebetzedadin tmein meisha me'utin mistalkin litzedadin. So Rabbi Yosef says, you know what? I disagree, Rabbi Meir. Not all the saliva that you find on the ground is tahor. The rule is normally whatever's in the middle of the street is tameh. Whatever's on the side of the street is tahor. Why? Because in the normal rest of the year, the tameh people walk in the middle of the street, and anyone who's tahor, he wants to be very careful. He walks on the side of the street to stay away from everybody else. However, on the regel, when it's a holiday, the majority of people are tahorim because they have to be, because they're coming for aliyah l'regel. So the ones walking in the center of the street are the ones that are most likely to be tahor. The ones on the sides of the streets are avoiding the people in the middle, so they don't make them tameh. So therefore, what you find on the sides in that case will be bad. Derech yirida lebeta tevilat me'in v'derech aliyat teorin shelo kiridatan aliyatan dever Rebbe Meir. All kelim that you find by the mikveh, if they were dropped on the way down, there was a way going down to the mikveh and there was a way coming up on the other side. So if you find them on the way down, so you assume they never made it in, so then they're tme'im. But if you find it on the way up, you assume that they went to the mikveh, they dipped it in, and it fell out of the bag, on the way up. So therefore it's tahor. That's the way that most of the Mefarshim understand this. The Rambam has a different thing, that it depends on how they fell, exactly what position they're in. You could determine whether they went in the mikveh or not. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kulan Taurin Chutz Min Asal V'Magrefa V'Amritza Hamiyuchadin Lekvarot. Anything that you find in Jerusalem, we assume it's tahor, except for three things. One is the sal, the basket, the magrefa. A magrefa is these are tools that were used. Hamaritza was used for breaking bones or for shoveling. A shovel or a bone breaking thing that were used for kvurat. They were designated for tameh activities. In other words, for burial. So anything, burial tools, for sure we assume they're tameh. But anything else that you find around, we can assume it's tahor. So Rabbi Yossi is obviously much more lenient, much more liberal on this than Rabbi Meir, because he's saying even something that you find on the way down to the mikveh, you could assume that it was tahor. Sakin, we actually did this piece in Masechet Pesachim, if you recall, but it was around towards the end of Masechet Pesachim, but not quite. Maybe towards the latter half of Masechet Pesachim, we discussed this Mishnah. Sakin shenimtzet biyodal shochet ba miyad. If you find a knife anywhere in Jerusalem on the 14th of Nisan, meaning on Erev Pesach, you can use it immediately. You can assume any knife that you find is tahor, because everybody made their knives tahor yesterday, so that they'll be able to do the Korban Pesach. Because there's two things you need. You need to dip your knife in the mikveh. You have to wait for Erev Shemesh. You have to wait for the evening to come. So they had to do it yesterday, so that it would be tahor for the 14th of Nisan, so they could do their Korbanot, their Korban Pesach. So if you find a knife that's for Shechita on the 14th of Nisan, you can use it right away, because you assume it's tahor. However, Bishlosha Asar Shoneh Umatbil. But if you find it on the 13th of Nisan, you have to put it in the mikveh, because maybe the person didn't get around to doing it yet. In other words, if you found it on the 14th, you know that he did it yesterday. But if you find it on the 13th, maybe he didn't do it yet when you found it. So you have to go back to the mikveh. It says shoneh umatbil. You do it again because maybe he did do it, but you can't be sure. Kofitz bazeh bazeh shoneh umatbil. If you find a cleaver, in other words, that's used for cutting meat, not for shechita, for cutting meat, there bazeh bazeh shoneh umatbil. Meaning, even on the 14th of Nisan, you have to assume it's not tahor. Cleaver is for butchering the meat, for cutting the meat, for butchering.
It's not the hook that you...
No, it's for cutting. Kofitz, no.
It's got a handle. It looks like a handle.
It has a handle. It looks like a little saw, like a little hatchet, right?
Ah.
Yeah. So what happens is here. Why even if you find it on the 14th of Nisan is it considered tamei? As we learned in Masechet Pesachim, the reason is because on the 14th of Nisan, what did they need? They needed knives for shechita. They didn't need knives for butchering the meat because you weren't allowed to break the bones of the Korban Pesach. So it could be that this guy, he wants it for tomorrow. He wants it for the 15th of Nisan, for the holiday, to be able to butcher his meat. But he doesn't need it for the Korban Pesach because you're not allowed to break the bones. So what does he do? He waits till right before Yom Tov to dip it, because anyway he can't use it till tomorrow. So even if you found it on the 14th of Nisan, you can't be sure that he dipped it already. Maybe he's going to dip it at the last minute because he didn't need it today anyway. That's possible. However, if the 14th of Nisan falls out on Shabbat, then even the cleaver you can use right away, because you know he must have done the tevilah yesterday, because you're not allowed to do tevilat kelim on Shabbat. Okay, now, and similarly, if you find the knife on the 15th of Nisan, you can use it for shechita right away. Why? Because then we assume that everybody's kelim are tehorim for the holiday. Okay, now, if you found the cleaver tied to the sakin, tied to the knife, so which halacha should we follow? Should we assume that it's tahor like the knife? Or should we assume it's tamei? So it says, harehi kasakin, it's going to be treated like the sakin. So since we assume that the knife was immersed in the mikveh, we also assume the same about the cleaver in this case. Now, incidentally, there is a machloket in the Shulchan Aruch regarding whether you can do tevilat kelim of the kind that we do on Shabbat. There are many that the Shulchan Aruch actually holds that you can do tevilat kelim, the one that we do, because it's not for tum'ah. It's not for real impurity, the one that we do. It's a separate mitzvah of tevilat kelim. That the only tevilat kelim that's prohibited according to the Shulchan Aruch is tevilat kelim from actual impurity. However, according to the Rama in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the accepted Ashkenazic view, you're not allowed to do tevilat kelim, even the one that we do. You're not allowed to do today on Shabbat. Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi katzran shel nuchrim hayasham. What is the reason why the upper marketplace saliva found on the ground in the upper marketplace was considered tamei? And remember, it's av hatumah, which means even if it touches a person, they will become tamei. It's a high level of tumah. So because there was a laundry group of, not launderers like people who launder money, but a laundromat of non-Jews up in the upper marketplace, and since we generally treated, since the non-Jews did not have to observe the laws of purity and impurity, and therefore we presumed them to be like Zavim all the time, because we couldn't know, they didn't observe the laws because it wasn't their religion. So we assumed that, so since there were a lot of non-Jews up there, it was a non-Jewish part of the city, so we assumed that saliva up there might be tamei from ziva. Am Rabbi Chanina, arodot hayu nocharin b'Yerushalayim. That it says that there were, now according to the translation that makes the best sense about what an arod is here, is not that it means, like some are saying it means some kind of a scorpion or something like that, but that it means some kind of a wild donkey. Okay, some kind of a wild animal that they used to nocharin, they used to kill them in Jerusalem, and the reason why they would kill them was because they would feed them to the lions. Actually, so they would feed lions these wild donkeys. They weren't kosher,
Why would they feed them to the lions?
What else were they going to feed them?
Why feed the lions?
I think the lions.
They had lions. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess they had lions. I don't know what the lions were for, but it says that they used to. It says that they used to have lions. I don't know. That's what it says. That they would.
Need any help?
Yeah, maybe not. Well, the lions actually, they live a good life. The lions seem to live a good life because the women do everything. Right. Oh, it says because it was for the arayot of the melech. So the king had like a menagerie of animals. That's why. Right. It wasn't that each individuals had their own lions. It was that the king had like a little zoo. He had a.
This is where Saddam Hussein took.
I guess so. Many people did that. Remember, the kings of the ancient world. They used to have all kinds of things. Shlomo Melech. They brought him all kinds of birds and animals and things like that. Right. And remember in the beginning of the Ten Commandments when they come back from the expedition and Moses brings all of those birds and all those interesting animals that he collected in Africa and all that. It's it's the Ten Commandments, the movie. In the beginning, he brings all of those animals, the elephants and everything, Anyway, they would do that, because the kings, they would keep these rare animals. It was like a kavod that they...
It's not in the text.
No, I'm just saying in the movie, I'm just saying because in the old days, kings would do that. They would collect, these rare animals from their exploits and things like that.
Zoo.
Yeah, that is it. Yeah. So, anyway, they would kill these arodot for that. And it says, "V'hayu olei regalei mishtakin bahem ad arkivotehen," and the blood was there was so much blood, it would be going up to the legs of the people who were coming to Aliyah Regel. And they came before the Chachamim and said, "Are we tameh?" Because this is a tameh animal. It's nevela.
This is the wild donkey.
It's nevela. These wild donkeys, they're nevela. And their blood should be tameh, because just like a pig or anything else, a dead animal should be tameh. It's nocharin. They aren't doing shechita. Even if it was a kosher animal, it would be tameh if it's killed without shechita. So now the blood is on us. What do we do? And they didn't say anything to them. They let them go into the Beit HaMikdash even though they had contact with this blood. So obviously they didn't consider it tameh. Amar Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Maseh b'Pirdash Mishel bit Rabbi. Now this is fascinating because we had this exact sugya. What we're about to read is word for word pretty much, or at least 99% word for word, exactly a sugya that we read in the third parak of this exact masechet, and it acts like it's a totally new thing, which is remarkable. We had this exact sugya word for word, the next paragraph or so, earlier in the masechet, and it's fascinating. I've never seen that before. So, once there was a mule in the house of Rabbi that died, and they said the blood of this animal is not tameh. The flesh is tameh, but not the blood. Rabbi Elazar sha'il Rabbi Simon. Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Simon, ad kama? How much blood is not tameh? In other words, are you saying a little bit of the blood is not tameh, but if you had a revi'it, it would be? If you had a large quantity, it would be? V'lo agiva, he didn't respond. Sha'il Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Lei, he asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and he said to him, Amar Lei ad revi'it tahor. Until a revi'it is tahor, but yoter miken tameh. But more than a revi'it is tameh. In other words, a little bit is not going to make you tameh, but a lot will make you tameh. Uba'ash Rabbi Lazar de lo hazar le Rabbi Simon shmu'ata. And Rabbi Lazar was upset, he was insulted that Rabbi Simon didn't answer him when he asked the question. We had this exact story before. Rav Bevai havayativ matnei hadin uvda. Rav Bevai was telling over the story of what happened in this whole discussion about the pirda, about the mule of Rabbi's house that died, and they said that the blood was not tameh. Amar le Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna ad kama. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna asked the question, how much blood is not tameh? In other words, is it infinite? You could have an entire tank full of this mule blood, and it's not going to be tameh. So he said, Amar le ad revi'it tahor, yoter miken tameh.
How do you measure that?
Okay, so it says if you have a revi'it, it's tahor.
You do what? Like a revi'it?
But more than that's tameh.
Generally you talk about a revi'it when you consume them, but the revi'it where? Like on the ground? Like what?
That's to make it static animal.
Like
I guess
revi'it on the ground, or
I don't know. Maybe they used to take the blood for something, like for fertilizer or something. They might have collected it and had it in vessels and stuff like that. They probably used it.
This was at somebody's house?
This was at Rebbe's house, Rebbe Udanasi. They probably used it for something.
Yeah, or maybe they were trying to cut him a break.
Who knows? I don't know. Here the point is that he didn't actually answer him. He asked it twice. He asked, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna asked, how much? And he didn't answer. So he said, Amar le ad revi'it tahor yoter miken tameh, u'ba'at be. And he kicked him. Amar le Rabbi Zrika, begin to have a sha'ilach at ba'it be. He said, just because he asked you a question, you kick him. Why are you kicking the man? Now, ba'ate might not be literal. It might be, figurative, that he was rude to him. Okay?
It's probably why they're repeating it, because it's funny.
It's a funny story. Amar le begin de lo havat datibi. He said, my mind wasn't with me. I'm sorry that I was being rude. So why was my mind not with me? So the Amar Rav Chanin vayu chayecha tulim lecha mineged zeh shu lokech lo chitin l'shana. It says in the klalot of the Torah that if a person's life will hang in the balance, this is a person who buys the wheat for a year. In other words, he only knows where his livelihood is coming from for the next year. After that, he doesn't know. That's your life hanging in the balance. You will be afraid night and day. This is someone who purchases smaller quantities, meaning maybe per week or something like that. He purchases smaller quantities, so not the full year, but not living hand to mouth literally. And you won't trust in your life. This is talking about somebody who goes to the bakery every day, meaning that they don't have anything in the bank. They don't have any savings. And I have to go to the bakery every day. In other words, I don't know where my next meal is coming from. Every morning I have to go to the store and buy something new. So I'm very stressed out. So that's why I was rude. I apologize. Right? But it wasn't because of the question. No, this is Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna.
Talking about
Right, he was asking the question. Oh no, I'm sorry. Was this Rav Bevai? Maybe this was Rav Bevai answering, because he asked Rav Bevai the question, and Rav Yitzchak Bar Bisna asked. In other words, Rav Bevai was telling the story, and Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna asked the question, and so it must have been Rav Bevai that was the one who said, I'm very stressed out about my livelihood, so I snapped at you. My kadun. So what's the bottom line? Ha'id Rabbi Yoshua ben Pitora al dam nevelot shu tahor. That Rabbi Yoshua ben Pitora said that dam nevelot is tahor. In other words, that the blood of a dead animal that is not a kosher animal, nivela, or wasn't slaughtered properly, is tahor. So what is the implication? The simple way of reading that is that it's completely tahor, no matter how much you have. So this seems to contradict the rule that we just said, that more than a revi'it is tameh. How could he say it's tahor? What he meant was ma'u tahor milahakshir. Litamot mitameh. That it must mean that it's tahor milahakshir, meaning, as we learned earlier, that there are certain number of mashkim. There are 7 mashkim, 7 liquids that can render something susceptible to tum'ah. Because remember, something has to first be wet before it can become tameh. So if you pull a vegetable out of the ground, yes, it's had rainwater fall in it, that doesn't count. From the minute that it comes out of the ground, let's say it's dry right this minute, now it has to come into contact with one of the 7 mashkin, one of the 7 liquids, in order to become tameh. So he said that what he meant when he said tahor was that if the blood of a nevela touches this apple or something, it doesn't make it susceptible to tumah. The blood itself, if there's a revi'it, will make it tameh, but it can't make it susceptible to tumah to begin with, okay? But is that true? But taman tanenam, we learned over there, dam sheretz mitameh kivsaro. We learned that the blood of a sheretz, of one of the creepy crawlies, is mitameh like its flesh. Mitameh ve'eno machshir. It's mitameh, but it doesn't render something susceptible to tumah. In other words, it's not treated like a liquid that makes other things susceptible to tumah. It's only treated like the flesh of the sheretz itself. So what do you see? Ve'en lanu kayotzebo. And it says, ve'en lanu kayotzebo. There's nothing else like this. Meaning there's nothing else that conveys tum'ah, but doesn't render things susceptible to tum'ah. So how can you say that that's the rule of the blood of a nevela? The blood of a nevela, then, when it says it's tahor, it must mean it's completely tahor. It's completely tahor. Not that it can convey tum'ah, but it can't make it susceptible to tum'ah. That's not possible. The answer, no, the Gemara says, no, wait a second. En lanu kayotzebo kashiur tumato. Aval damo mitameh kivsaro. That what it means is that there's nothing else like it that kashiur tumato, with regard to the tum'ah, of the measurement of the tum'ah. In other words, that there's such a small measurement that all you need is a lentil size of sheretz to convey tum'ah, whether it's of the flesh or of the blood. That's what it meant, ve'en lanu kayotzebo, that there's nothing else like it, that the flesh and the blood are of equal status. Because when it comes to a nevela, we're saying that a nevela, a kazayit would be enough to convey tum'ah if it's flesh. But if it's the blood, you need revi'it, it's more. Okay, you're going to need more. So that's what it means. But we can still maintain that when Rabbi Yoshua ben Patora said that the blood is tahor, he meant it's tahor, meaning that it can't make something susceptible to tum'ah. But he would agree that if there's a revi'it of it can make something tameh that's already susceptible. Okay? That's what the Gemara is saying now. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef says, Pligi Batrei Amora'in. There was a machloket between two Amora'in. Chad Amar Tamei v'Chad Amar Tahor. One says that blood is Tamei, one says that the blood is Tahor. Man da Amar Tamei ki Rabbi Yehuda. The one that says Tamei is following Rabbi Yehuda. That says once you have a revi'it of blood, of the nivela, it's Tamei. Uman da Amar Tahor, Rabbi Yoshua ben Petorah. And the one that says that it's Tahor is following the literal reading of Rabbi Yoshua ben Petorah, that no matter how much you have, it's Tahor. Amale Rav Avdomad min Nachuta, that Rav Avdomad from Nachuta said, V'yaot to Rabbi Yehuda Moryanna devei Nasiyahava. It makes sense because Rabbi Yehuda was the posek for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and therefore, since he was the posek of that household, it makes sense that he would be the one who said that blood was only tahor up to a revi'it, but then once you have a revi'it, it can be tamei. Why? Because Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that he was only being lenient because there was less than a revi'it. Not that it was completely tahor, but it was only he was only lenient up to a revi'it. Why was he only lenient up to a revi'it? Because Rabbi Yehuda was the posek, and Rabbi Yehuda was the one who held that up to a revi'it, the blood of a nevela is tahor. Once you have a revi'it, the blood of a nevela is tamei. And that's what he held in the house of Rabbi. That's why the mule in Rabbi's house, the blood, didn't convey tumah because there wasn't a revi'it of it. Okay, that's the way that the Gemara concludes. But there is a view that says that it's completely tahor, meaning that it can't convey tumah at all. Even if you have a gallon of it, it won't convey tumah. But that's not the way that Rabbi Yehuda held. So, Kol Rokim, we say that all the spittle, all of the saliva in Jerusalem, Lo ken amar Rabbi Abau b'shem Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina. Didn't Rabbi Abba say in the name of Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina the following, that they didn't make a gzera on the spittle in Jerusalem? Right? Isn't that what he said? In other words, that they didn't make a gzera at all. So now you're telling me that there are limitations. It depends where, it depends which location. Ha itmar ale, it was said about this, Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, katzon shel nochrim hayasham, that the reason why in the upper marketplace they said that the saliva there was tamei was because, again, there was a non-Jewish laundromat up there. Most of the people were non-Jewish, and therefore we considered the saliva like the saliva of a zav. This is the same answer we gave in the beginning of the sugya. It's just that it was like in two different conversations the same answer was given. Okay, so it's recorded twice. Now we get to B'shar Yemot Hashana Hatmein Mahalachin, that we say on the rest of the year Hatmein Mahalachin Shibolet Vatorin Mahalachin Minatzad. That in the rest of the year, the Tamei people walk in the middle of the road, and the Tahor people walk on the side. Vatorim malachin stam, vatmein omrin lahen paroshu. And the Tahorim walk, and the Tameim say to them, "Get away from us." In other words, they'll tell them not to come near, so they don't become Tamei. Now, according to the Graz version, it's that the Tamei people walk, and the Tahor people tell them to get away from them. And that during the rest of the year, the Tahor people walk in the middle of the road, and the Tameim walk to the side, and the Tahor people tell the Tamei people to go away. Right? In other words, whoever the majority is, majority rules. Right? Majority rules. So therefore, in the times of the holiday, what?
Majority of the people get the middle of the road.
Right, they get the middle of the road, and they get to tell you, get away from me. Right? So during the holiday, they can say to the Tamei people, get away, go on the side of the road. But during the rest of the year, the Tamei people say, you want to be Tahor? You go on the side of the road. Don't bother me. I want to walk in the middle. So that's the way it goes. Okay, so B'shad the regal Torin Mahalach. So he has the reverse here. He has Torin Mahalachin Stam Batmein Omrim Lahen Paroshu. That he says that no, the rest of the year actually that this is really so. B'shar Yemot Hashana Tmein Mahalachin Shibot Vatorin Mahalachin Minatzad. That on regular times the Tmein walk in the middle of the road and the Tahorin walk on the side of the road, and the Tmeim say go away. Right? Then it should say, but at the time of the holiday, Hatorin Mahalachin Stam. That's when the Tahor people walk in the middle. Vatmein Omrin Lahen Paroshu. Okay, that's how it should be. All right, but then it repeats b'shat regulatorin malachin shibolet vatmein malachin minatzad vatmein malachin stam vatmein omrim lahem paroshu. So in other words, it's repeating the same concept twice. In other words, the idea here is the same idea that the Torim own the road during the holiday. They can walk in the middle and tell the Tameim to go away. And during the rest of the year, the people who are Tameim stam, they're the majority. They get to walk wherever they want in the middle of the road. And when the Tahor person comes, they can't say, "Hey, excuse me, can I please walk?" No, you want to be Tahor, you go on the side. So it's whoever the majority is. Yeah, exactly. So we said that all the kelim that are found going down to the mikveh versus going up from the mikveh. Didn't Rabbi Abau in the name of Rabbi Yochanan say that they didn't make any gezerot? They didn't decree a suspicion of tum'ah upon the vessels in Jerusalem. So why here are we making a distinction and saying, well, if it's on the way down to the mikveh, it's on the way up to the mikveh? The answer is because that since they're found on the walkway down to the mikveh, it's like you have evidence that they're tamei. It's not that we're making a gezerah. You really have evidence that demonstrates that they are in fact tamei. Abba Shaul haya koreotan tziporen. That Abba Shaul used to call this vessel tziporen, not meritza. The vessel in the Mishnah that it said that everybody agrees is considered tamei is this thing that they would break rocks with. Okay, it was a very strong tool that would break rocks to dig the graves in rock that they used to make. So manda amar tziporen shaya domel tziporen. Why would he call it a tziporen? Because it was like a fingernail. In other words, it scraped away the rocks. It would break through the rocks. Manda amar meritza shemeritza et even the bet hakvarot. Why would it call it meritza? Because it causes it to move. Okay, it causes the rock to move to make a kever, to make as some kind of a grave that they used to bury a lot of people in rock instead of in dirt back then. So there were two words for that tool. Some people called it the tziporin, and some people called it the meritza. The reason why the Gemara is telling you this is that you should know that both have the same law. That since they're used in the digging of graves, in the pulverizing of stone or the breaking of stone to make graves, therefore we do assume that they are tamei, even though we assume that most things are not tamei unless we know otherwise.
It's a keli that well used in Israel. It's the cart, to carry.
Oh, is that what they call it now? That's how they use it now? Yeah.
It's well known.
Like, wheelbarrow. So, kofitz. Tanei sakin kshura la harezo kimota. That the kofitz, it said in the Mishnah, that if the cleaver is connected to the knife, since we presume the knife to be tahor, we also presume the cleaver to be tahor. However, in the Braita it said hasakin kshura harizo kimota. It says the opposite in the Braita, that since the knife is connected to the cleaver, we assume the worst. Right, so there's a machloka between the Braita and the Mishnah how to rule. Now we get to an interesting halacha, parochet shenitmet bevlada tuma. That what happens when the parochet in the Beit HaMikdash becomes tameh? From a vlada tuma. In other words, normally a vessel, kelim, can only become tameh from avatuma, not from rishon the tuma. So if something which was rishon the tuma, in other words, a derivative tuma touches the parochet, it's only going to be tameh midirabanan, not mideoraita. Whereas if it touches av hatuma, it will be mideoraita, even from the Torah tameh.
But
so
the parochet is susceptible to tuma.
Yes, it is.
Even though it's
considered a kli, because it's detachable. Right, it's a curtain. So if it became tameh only from a vlad tumah, only from a derivative of tumah, not from a source of tumah. In other words, for example, let's say, a kohen went he was tameh and he went in, he wasn't supposed to, but he touched the parochet. Okay, then he's going to be let's say he touched an av hatumah, so he is a rishon, and now he's going to touch the parochet. So there we would say it's only tamei midrabanan. You can do the tevilah of that inside the grounds of the Beit HaMikdash, machnisino tamiyad, and you can put it right back. Do the tevilah, put it right back, because we don't want the parochet to be gone out of its place for too long. But if it became tamei from an avatuma, in other words, let's say the kohen himself was tamei, he was a zav or something, he shouldn't be in there, but let's say he is, and he touches the parochet, so what happens then? You have to take it out of the Beit HaMikdash because it's tameh now. It can't be there. You have to take it out and put it and do the tevilah, immerse it outside of the Beit HaMikdash, and they would place it in the chil. The chil was an area outside of the azarot, outside of the actual courtyards, but attached to the Beit HaMikdash. It was a chamber off the side of the Beit HaMikdash called the chil, and that was where they would put it. Because it needs to wait overnight. Because since it really was tameh, it's not just tameh midirabanan, it's tameh mideoraita, it's tameh min Torah. So therefore, it has to wait at least until evening. So you have to leave it there to dry until evening time.
Tell me about the parochet. The parochet, what is
the curtain?
It was the curtain between the Kodesh HaKodashim and the Kodesh. Yeah.
It's not.
No. This is in the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash parochet. So what happens? If it was a brand new parochet, they also had a rule that any new keli that would come into the Beit HaMikdash, they had to do tevilah. They had to immerse it in the mikveh. So what happens if it's a brand new parochet that they made for the Beit HaMikdash? So then, what they would do was, after they immersed it, shotchinota al gava itztabah. That they would hang it outside the Beit HaMikdash on the portico. They had like an outside place where people would sit and wait. Like for example, when Erev Pesach fell on Shabbat, people would bring their Korban Pesach. They had to hang out waiting for the holiday to start because it was Shabbat. They couldn't go home, so there was a seating area. This is where they would hang the parochet in that same place, so the people would get to see the brand new parochet, how beautiful it was, because it was a gorgeous piece of embroidered curtain. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben HaSagan. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the son of the Sagan. The Sagan is the assistant of the Kohen. Parochet ovia tefach. That the parochet, its thickness was a tefach. It wasn't a thin curtain. It was this thick. It was very thick, and al shivim ushtayim nimin. And it had 72. It was made of 72 ropes going across. In other words, when you would make this embroidery, so you would have the piece that goes across. In other words, the pieces that go across, and in between the threads are threaded. Okay, so the pieces that go across were 72 of them, and it says that. Al Shivim Nimim Ne'ereget, Al Kol Nima V'Nima, and every one of those threads, Kaf Dalir Chutin, okay, it had 24 threads. So the thick bands that went across the parochet, each one was so thick it had actually 24 threads woven into it. And in between those is sewn the rest of it. In other words, is sewn the rest of the parochet. It was 40 amot, orka mem amma, v'rochba kaf, and it was 20 amot wide. Umishmonim ushtayim ribo haytanaset. Now, most people take this to mean that it was 82 10,000s, which would mean 820,000. Right? 820,000 is talking about how much it costs to make this piece of work. That's one interpretation. Right, that it's gold dinarim, that's how much it costs. It was extremely expensive.
Exactly, yeah. We bought
right.
10,000. So.
Yeah, so it's 82 times 10,000. So it is 820,000. Okay, and it says, Ushtayim osin b'chol shana. They would make 2 every year. So they would replace it every year, twice. And even though it was very expensive. And ushlosh meot kohanim matbilin otan. It was so big. This is the parochet. So, yeah, well, we'll see why. Because the smoke from the offerings had ruined it. And why did they hang it out to dry for the people to see it? Because normally nobody goes in the Kodesh except the Kohanim. They have this gorgeous piece of art in there. Nobody gets to see it. It's not a museum. So nobody goes in. So it took 300 Kohanim to immerse this parochet because it was so heavy and thick. And you could see if 72 bands are going across, each one 24, and it's 24 strings, and the thickness is a tefach. I mean, it's a big thing.
Well, I mean, by the time you immerse it, then it's
going to really be soaked, really heavy.
Well, it becomes 20 times the.
It'll be really heavy, yeah. So now they're going to get. Where do we get that each one of these threads that goes across has to be 24 threads? So ilo amar chut. If it said chut echad, that would mean 1 thread. Kaful lishnaim. Okay, that would mean 1 thread folded into 2. But shazur, the word shazur would mean shlosha. Moshzar l'shisha. Moshzar with an extra mem would mean 6 threads. Arba, and then you have techelet ve'argaman ve'tolat shani ve'shesh. You have 4 different kinds of thread. So that means whatever you have to multiply by 4. 4 times 6 is mikan ha'isrim ve'arba. You're going to have 24. Because you're going to have 4 different types of threads. 6 of each. However, Tani, we learned in a Braita Shloshim U'Shtayim, actually it was 32 threads. Because ilu amar chut echad kaful l'shnayim. Because if it said chut, that would mean 1 folded into 2. Shazur le'arba. If it said shazur, that would mean 4. Moshzar l'shmone. If it said moshzar, it would mean 8. So then arba, we have 4 different kinds of strings. Mikan hat latin utrein. So in other words, since you're going to multiply 8 times 4, you're going to get 32. And then one last interpretation. Tanat says in another Braita, arba'im u'shmoneh. It was actually 48. Why? Because ilu amar chut echad kaful l'shnayim. Kli'a l'shlosha. Shazur l'shisha. Moshzar l'shneim asar. The word moshzar brings it all the way up to 12. Okay? So therefore, because it could have said kli'a would have meant 3. Shazur would have meant 6. Moshzar would mean 12. But now that you multiply 12 by arba'a, mikan ha-arba'im utmanya. So then you're going to have 48. So there were 48 strands in each one of these thick bands that went across, each one of the 72 thick bands that went across the parochet. Katuv echad omer maaseh rokem. One pasuk says it was maaseh rokem, it was embroidered. But katuv echad omer maaseh choshev, and one says it was calculated, it was choshev, it was artwork. Maaseh rokem partuv echad. Maaseh rokem means that there was one face. In other words, one side had a face. Maaseh choshev shnei partufot. Maaseh choshev means that you could put two different faces on either side. In other words, if you looked at one side of the parochet, you would see one thing. If you looked at the other side of the parochet, you see something else. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia had a difference of opinion here. Chad amar maaseh rokem, ari mikan, vari mikan, maaseh choshev, ari mikan, vehalak mikan. That according to one, maaseh rokem means that there's a lion on either side. Okay, there's two faces, a lion on one side, a lion on the other side. If it said maaseh choshev, that means ari mikan vehalak mikan. There's nothing on the other side. Okay, v'charana amar, the other said maaseh rokem ari mikan vehalak mikan. Maaseh rokem would mean a face on one side and nothing on the other side. But maaseh choshev ari mikan v'nesher mikan, that what it means is not only was there something on both sides, but there was something different on either side. In other words, there was a lion on one side and an eagle on the other side of the parochet. So the embroidery, it was a thick piece of carpet, of curtain, so they could actually embroider a totally different picture on either side. That was how it was done. So it was done not just with something on one side and blank on the other side, or the same thing on both sides, but it was done with two different things. So depending on what side you were looking at, you would see something different.
Do you know what's the meaning of the nesher? Why?
Because of the Maaseh Merkava. In the Merkava of Yechezkel, it describes the nesher.
Going copy this is the German nesher.
Yeah. It's in the Merkava of Yechezkel. That's where it comes from. So b'shmonim u'shtayim ribo ha'tanaset, it doesn't really comment on that necessarily, but it says it was 820,000 dinarim. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bizna b'shem Shmuel Guzma. You could say that that's referring to the price. Saying Guzma, it's an exaggeration. It wasn't really that expensive. That's too much. However, so if we take it just a simple reading of this Gemara, he's saying that price is an exaggeration. It wasn't really that much. Couldn't be that it was 820,000. Okay? Now he says, Tamantanin, and we learned over there, Pamim haya aleha kishlosh me'ot kur, that sometimes there were 300 kur. There was so much ash that got onto the parochet. That got onto the mizbeach, rather, from the korbanot. That there was so much ash collected there that there was 300 kur of ashes on there. That's a huge amount. Okay, it's like saying ton. It's like saying there was a ton. So what does he say? So Rabbi Yossi be Rabbi Bon b'shem Shmuel guzma. So there too he says that's a guzma. In other words, it's an exaggeration. It's like when you say, oh my gosh, this weighs a ton. Really? It weighs 2,000 pounds? No, it weighs a lot. So when they said 300 cord, they didn't mean literally 300 cord. That's too much. But it meant there was a heck of a lot. It would be really difficult to lift it. Now, there's some people who interpret also that when it says guzma, the first guzma, it wasn't about the price of the parochet, but it was about when it said 300 kohanim were necessary to immerse it. That was also guzma. That it means that, okay, maybe not 300, it means a lot. A lot of kohanim. It doesn't necessarily mean exactly 300. Shabbat shalom.